Well, in 1979, in spite of the title county judge, there was nothing judicial about the job that I had. I was like the mayor of the county. We had a police department, we had a jail. We were doing such exciting things as fixing potholes and stop signs. My definition of a foreign trip was to go to Nashville. I think it's pretty safe to say I had never been anywhere. And all of a sudden, I got an invitation to go on one of these ACYPL trips. Of course, I'd never heard of ACYPL either. And as you heard, we had an interesting delegation. My roommate on the entire trip was John Ashbrook. Some of you know John. He is, I think it's safe to say, a straight arrow. He was the only one of our delegation who was not disturbed that we couldn't get a drink in Saudi Arabia. And of course, the antithesis of John Ashbrook, of course, would be Jerry Springer, right? I mean, can you imagine any two people more different than John Ashbrook and Jerry Springer? Well, Springer was on the trip too, went on to become famous for other things, or infamous, depending upon your point of view. But I think I'm safe in saying that this organization is really, really important. Most young people of my generation had never been anywhere. It's much more common now for even high school students to go abroad. But I still think what ACYPL does by identifying people who are interested in public service and may actually go somewhere and become more significant in public service at an early age, and to provide the exchanges that it's been providing for these 50 years, is a really important function. And so I deeply appreciate the recognition. It's nice to watch the film and see how many of my colleagues have also had the same experience on the way up. And this is an organization that ought to continue. I also just wanted to touch on Burma, which the folks there are now calling Myanmar, because Aung San Suu Kyi is in town this very day. And I understand that for the last 3 or 4 years, you've had young Burmese leaders to the United States. That's an emerging democracy that our country has done a lot to help develop in the right direction. And I know those young Burmese students who I hope are in the United States now have had an opportunity to enjoy Aung San Suu Kyi's visit. She'll be at the Capitol tomorrow. So let me sum it up by thanking you for the recognition. I hope this organization lasts forever. I think what it does is really, really important, not only for our country, but for other countries around the world. Thank you so much.
Joseph, thank you very much. Congratulations to Mitch McConnell and to Spencer Oliver for also being honored this evening. I should be giving you something. ACYPL gave me an opportunity 37 years ago that was a big part of my life, and I learned at the cocktail reception ahead of time, as others who participated in these trips came forward, they said exactly the same thing. As I do, they remembered so many details about trips that took place 10, 20, 30 years ago, and the profound impact that those visits had on their view of the world, and in many cases, on their future. I remember my trip, 1979, to the Soviet Union. It was one of the darkest moments of the Cold War. And we flew into Moscow on Aeroflot, an adventure in itself. And I remember over my seat seeing a little compartment, and I looked closely to see what was written on that and translated, and it said, "Escape rope." I spent most of that trip trying to imagine how I would use the escape rope on my Aeroflot jet. We arrived in Moscow, and they said, "Don't even try to unpack. We're going immediately to Red Square. You happen to have arrived just minutes before the annual military parade where the Soviets are going to show off all their weapons and all their troops and march through Red Square." Well, we raced over there. Snow was falling, and they showed us to a spot where we were supposed to stand. And before I got there, this elderly woman came up and got 6 inches in front of my face and started lecturing me in Russian, which I didn't know a word of, Finally, one of the translators came over, and I said, "What is she so upset about? She hate America?" "No," he said, "she hates the fact that you're not wearing a hat and it's snowing." We had a good time in Moscow. I got to visit the gum department store where they had babushkas for me to take home to my wife. All of them were XXL, but they did have some to offer. We went to Minsk, where Soviet bureaucrats would give us lectures. Before the revolution, there were no movie projectors in Belarus. Since the revolution, there are 1,400 movie projectors in Belarus. The radiators were hissing, the room was hot, and we endured it to hear the glories of the revolution. We went from there to Leningrad, which was a memorable journey, visiting the Hermitage, and also meeting some of the Russian soldiers who survived the siege. Some had saved the crusts of bread that were made largely out of sawdust so they could get through the terrible endurance which they faced there. We went to Vilnius, which, as Joseph mentioned, was special to me. My mother was born in Lithuania. She was alive at the time, but she'd never been back. And I was able to be the first child of hers to go visit her homeland. I can recall vividly going to the University of Vilnius, where the Soviets wanted to show us with great pride that they had taken over the Catholic chapel in the University of Vilnius and converted it into the Museum of Atheism. On display was an array, a selection of Australian boomerangs for reasons I never understood. There were several instances where we got into vodka toast. I only did that one night, never again. And the last part of the trip was basically to go back to Moscow, all travel by train, and to return home. I came back 2 weeks of life experience, 2 weeks of memories, with an insight into what the Soviet Union was really like from the inside. I don't know if I could have ever dreamed up a way to have that opportunity if it were not for ACYPL. As Joseph mentioned, I went to the School of Foreign Service, and at one point I thought that's what I wanted to do, and then I fell in love with politics. I've tried to marry the two, my interest in international affairs and my interest in American politics. But the real beginning in my life for an appreciation of this world, its complexity, its challenge, and the many things that we can learn by getting up and going was that trip in 1979. It's an old cliche, but it's true. They say you don't appreciate a country until you visit it, and you don't appreciate your home until you leave it. Thanks, ACYPL, for 50 great years.